Viewers, you're watching Converse, and we have with us a very special guest. He is the Prime Minister's economic advisor, but today he's in his capacity as historian and writer. Now, before I introduce to you Sanjeev Sanyal, I just want to set the context, viewers, for why we are having this conversation with Sanjeev Sanyal. You know, viewers, that over the last few days, perhaps over the last week, since the release of a movie on Rajarala Cholan, we've had a massive controversy raging around his identity. Now, Sanjeev Sanyal has written perhaps a definitive history of India's maritime influence, where he focuses extensively on the role of certain southern kings in expanding India's influence beyond the subcontinent. So let's first set the context with Mr. Sanyal on his book and locate some of these iconic figures of Indian history in the larger context. Mr. Sanyal, thank you very much for speaking to us. I want to begin by asking you first to a little bit talk about our southern history and its great influence on larger aspects of the Asian civilization.
So I think this controversy is about Rajaraja Chola. I would like to point out that the Cholas that we are dealing with are, of course, the great Cholas, which is of the 10th and 11th century. But do remember that the Cholas had been around for more than 1,000 years prior to that. And the history of the southern tip of India is mostly about the rivalry between three clans, not three dynasties, there are three clans. One is the Cholas, who are from the Thanjavur area, that is, you can call it northern Tamil Nadu. Another is the Pandyas from Madurai area, that is southern Tamil Nadu. And the Cheras, who are from the Coimbatore area, but then eventually came to rule what is now Kerala. So these three clans were continuously fighting each other for, over 1,000 years. And in the 10th and 11th century, it came to be dominated by the Cholas, who defeated and pushed back the other two, and then, of course, extended their power into Sri Lanka, and then, of course, very famously made these raids on Southeast Asia. So this was a group of people who dominated that part of the world for, about a century or so. And the Cholas were very much an important part of that history. But as I said, it's a longer history which involves the other clans. And of course, there were periods when other kingdoms and dynasties also came and sort of pushed these aside. For example, the Pallavas and so on. So
Mr. Sanyal, it's mystifying that we now have been sort of caught up in a debate about their identity. I don't think there is anything more quintessentially representative of our culture than perhaps these three clans that you're talking about, or even the fourth one that you just mentioned. So can you please explain to our viewers why perhaps we should be raising an eyebrow over this claim that none of them, or at least the Cholans, were not even Hindus?
Now, this is a peculiar claim to make because the great Cholas, Rajaraja, his son Rajendra Chola, and so on, have left lots of record for us. They are there in copper plates, they are there in inscriptions, they have built huge temples like the Brihadeshwara temple, and they are absolutely clear about their identity. They mark themselves out as Shaivites. Their Kul Devi was a form of Durga. They claim descent from Vishnu himself. So I don't think there is any question about what they consider to be their identity. And this is not just about the Cholas. This is true of all the other clans. The Sangam literature, by the way, is the oldest Tamil literature in existence. It was compiled between the 3rd century BC and the 3rd century AD. And I have with me the oldest Tamil Sangam literature book, which is the Tolkappiyam. Let me show you this book so that your can see it. This is the oldest one, goes back to 300 BC or thereabouts. And in its preface, there is the first declaration of Tamil identity. So let me read that out to you as well. It says, in the virtuous Tamil-speaking land that extends from Venkatam in the north to Kumari in the south. Venkatam is, of course, Tirumala Hills, and Kumari is Kanyakumari. So it's roughly speaking, even modern Tamil Nadu is in that kind of general area. So this is the first declaration of Tamil identity ever. But what is interesting about it is in the same preface, it goes on to say, endowed in the tongue of virtuous words, in the wisdom of the four Vedas rooted. So this is the oldest Tamil literature. It starts with a declaration of Tamil identity and it roots it in the knowledge and wisdom of the four Vedas. So right in the beginning, you have a declaration of Tamil identity in the context and deriving its legitimacy from the Vedas. So this idea that there are all these separate identities is completely mystifying to me, because the ancestors right in the beginning did not have any such separation of their identity from wider Indic civilization or Sanatan Dharma.
But we're also talking about a period, I mean, for a moment, if one were to consider the arguments that are being made by certain directors, certain actors, and even certain politicians down south, we're talking about a period when Hinduism was evolving and sects like Shaivism and Vaishnavism were gaining ground. Can therefore sects really be compared to Hinduism in the modern world?
Well, the word Hinduism itself is quite old, but it is certainly, by the way, even the word Hinduism is older than the Cholas, because it was used prior to the Cholas. But frankly, we don't need the word Hinduism to be used. We had a clear sense of our identity, of our religion. You go back to the Puranas, which are, with Iron Age texts, and you have clear demarcation of what we mean by Bharatvarsha. All the Puranas state that the Bharatvarsha is the land which is south of the Himalayas and north of the Great Southern Ocean, and it then lays out all the rivers and mountains of that landscape, in which the southern tip of the country, the river Kaveri, the Nilgiris, the southern Western Ghats, all of this is mentioned. So the fact that the southern tip of India was considered a part of Bharatvarsha is well established. That is not only there in the very earliest texts, even as recently as the 19th century, this is reiterated. There's something called the Trichy Proclamation, which there was a revolt of the polygars, which were the local chieftains against the East India Company. In 1801, they had a proclamation of independence. And in that proclamation of independence, they didn't say, we, the people of this small area, Shivaganga or whatever, are declaring independence. They didn't say that. They said, we, the people, the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Sudras, and Musalmans of Jambu Dweepa, which is the Indian subcontinent, hereby declare independence. So there is a very clear idea of national identity, which has been from the beginning of time till today. And the place where this idea that these are all separate groups is very much a colonial project. And what is funny about this debate is that they have left behind a clear documentation of their colonial project. So there was this missionary called Robert Cadwell, who was clearly building up a narrative of separation. But this was not just being done by him. There were a whole colonial project to do this. The tribals are not Hindu, the Tamils are not Hindu, the Hindus are not Hindu. In fact, forget the Hindus. India does not exist as a country at all. I mean, you have Churchill mentioning that, there is no such thing as India. It's no more unified than the country than the equator. So I can understand why a colonial occupying force wanted to do this. The question is, why do post-independence sort of intellectuals try to make the case that there is no such thing as India? I think that is the interesting issue, especially when there is like piles and piles and piles of evidence that these people, particularly the Cholas, had a strong Indian and specifically Hindu identity.
So this is very interesting, because what you're saying is that it would be wrong to say that while several traces of Shaivism are found during the Cholam rule, the underlying theme of Indian spirituality can't be divorced from
No,
this?
wait.
Yeah.
I think this is setting the argument up in the wrong place.
Okay.
How is Shaivism separate from Hinduism? How is Vaishnavism? I am a Shakta Hindu. I come from the Shakti tradition. I worship Durga and female divinities primarily. But I am also very clear that I am a part of the wider umbrella of Hinduism. Just like, there are many sects in other religions. The Catholics are also Christian. The Protestants are also Christian. The Baptists are Protestant Christians. So there are many subdivisions. There are in Hinduism as well. In fact, the interesting thing about Hinduism is that unlike the Protestants and the Catholics going to war, or the Sunnis and Shias going to war with each other over minor religious differences, this is quite rare in Hinduism. I mean, there may have been some tiffs between the Shaivites and the Vaishnavas, but by and large, they have been quite rare. And most Hindus will quite happily, Shaivite Hindus will quite happily go to Vaishnav shrines and vice versa. And in fact, I am a Shakta, and I have no great problem going to Shaivite or a Vaishnav shrine, or for that matter, a Buddhist or Jain. So this is the nature of the dharmic ecosystem of religious thought. This is widely practiced, and I think that is a good thing. To try and say, oh, they were Shaivites but not Hindu, is completely ridiculous.
Very interesting. I want to quickly build on this because some historians differ even, let's just focus a little bit on the Cholan era, differ with the idea of the Chola period being the golden age of Tamil culture. Some have even labeled the modern obsession with the quote-unquote glory as misplaced, citing the Cholas' unceasing appetite for expansion, which you also written about in your treatise, and also, of course, frequent violence against women. How do you see this other narrative that is being also sort of forced into the picture?
So actually, none of the historical records show anything that the Cholas were particularly nasty to women or anything like that. I don't think there is any reason to particularly pick on them. If anything, there's plenty of records. If you look at their architecture and their sculpture, there are women everywhere, and they're clearly participating in social, cultural, and even political life. So I think there is no particular reason for picking on the Cholas as being, particularly patriarchal or whatever else you want to accuse them of. Yes, they were expansionists. There is no question about that. But as I said, that depends on which period you look at. And there were periods when the Pandyas were the dominant power, or the Cheras were the dominant power. And there were periods, as I said, when all these three clans were pushed aside and the Pallavas were the dominant power. So there was political jostling for long periods of time. That does not mean that there was no period of great prosperity. The fact of the matter is that the peak of the great Cholas, which was this end of the 10th century and the early 11th century, when Raja Chola and Rajendra Chola, and then a couple of generations after that, was a period when the southern tip of India dominated Indian Ocean trade. And this was the lifeline of the world economy at that time, the supply chains of that time, which went from Fatimid Egypt all the way to Song Empire in China. This was all the highway of trade. And in the middle of it were the Cholas, and there is no question that this was a period of great prosperity in southern India. And so to call it a golden age, yes, but is it the only golden age? No. I mean, there were other periods. The Pallava period had. So you are dealing with vast spaces of time where different kingdoms did go through periods of great prosperity. Then they went into decline. Another one came, and so on and so forth. I don't think one has to negate the great Cholas in order to say, oh, no, but there was another period, or, oh, they were bad because they were expansionist. And yeah, they were expansionists. So what?
So very quickly, and my final question to you, large number of political parties who are, well, the ruling alliance now in Tamil Nadu, but are in opposition to the BJP at the center, have sort of insinuated that this movie that has been made by Mani Ratnam is sort of saffronizing all these greats, specifically Raja Chola. How do you view this? Where is this coming from then?
Well, I can't comment on, laughable political maneuvers of various groups. Fact of the matter is, I can only comment on what does the historical record show. The historical record is clear that Raja Raja and his son Rajendra Chola were great kings. They presided over a period that was, yes, expansionist, but it was also a period of great prosperity. And that is more than well documented in their own inscriptions and subsequent memories of that time as well. And, you know, it would be rather ridiculous for regionalist Tamil parties to try and negate the legacy of Raja Raja Chola, who by most accounts was perhaps their greatest king. Now, why anybody would want to commit cultural suicide in this particular way, I do not know. But it does show that a decolonization project is necessary, because these peculiar idea that, that Tamil culture is somehow dissociated with the wider Indic culture is purely a part of the colonial project. It is well documented. It was carried out by Christian missionaries and colonial officers who left behind words which you can read. And you can particularly research a gentleman called Robert Cadwell, who was clearly trying to provide a basis for the colonial project through breaking local cultural anchors.
Well, we leave it at that. Fascinating conversation with you, as always, Mr. Sanyal. Thank you very much for speaking with us. And of course, viewers, if you really want to get a greater overview of India's maritime history and its influence on its neighbors, do check out this book. It's a fantastic book. I don't know, Sanjeev Sanyal, if you have a copy, perhaps you could hold it up for our viewers.
I didn't realize I could advertise my book, but it's called The Ocean of Churn, and it's published by Penguin. You can pick it off Amazon or any other bookshop you wish to visit.
Yeah, I did read it a few years ago, and I think I've told you about that. It really opened my eyes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for speaking to Times Now and Converse.